Okay, so, Mark, to your question, there's so many instructional pieces up at the top and in the beginning. How do you know who needs to be in this process?
Yeah, that's a good question, and obviously it will depend a great deal on the particular congregational tradition that you're in and what the congregational leadership structure looks like in your setting. We would recommend that you include kind of all the key leadership decision makers that will be able to move it forward. I mean, one of the real benefits is the sort of consensus building and buy-in building that the tool can create. So ideally, you would involve anyone who would be involved in sort of big strategic level decision making or program level decision making in a congregation. In my tradition, that would be the session, the elders, and the clergy. Obviously, the more people you get involved, the slower it might be and the more complicated. But again, if it's not enough people, then you don't get the full benefit of it. One thing I will also note is that we've heard of a number of congregations using this in subgroups, sort of subparts of the departments or sections of the congregation. So for example, a youth ministry might choose to do it focused purely on the youth ministry. So then you might have, a few youth elders or volunteers and youth staff. They might do it, maybe there's some youth representation and so on. They do it together, focus specifically on what now for the youth ministry in the coming year. So it doesn't always have to be the whole congregation. It can be parts of it.
That's good to know. You talked about, as we talk about gathering people, y'all have acknowledged that these days and times are just strange. And there are various constraints, and there are various capabilities depending on where people are. And so as you talk about gathering this group, what does that mean? So there's the potential that you gather in person, there's the potential you gather online, could be on phone. Can y'all talk about how do you envision this process happening as a group?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did in the beginning is we didn't know how rapidly the context was going to change. And so we wanted to make it usable wherever people are. So in some places where you might be able to gather and you want to gather as a team, we wanted it to be a resource you could do. But also if you're only online, or even if you don't have the technology, if you've got a congregation where people aren't using Zoom, how does this tool work for you? So we asked all of those questions. I'll just talk about how you would use it if you run it in person. Again, we have made this easy to print. It's US letter size, so you download it. We would recommend that you send it to all of your participants before they come into the meeting, but that everyone has a copy. Because again, these exercises that are individual and collaborative, we would recommend that you assign a scribe, that you really have somebody that's a timekeeper. Now, that can change as you go through it. Like you might want someone to scribe for one session and somebody to timekeep for one, and you might want to rotate that role. But we think having roles as you go through it in person is really helpful. And some people want people to fill out the individual activities before they come, so the meeting goes shorter. And some people want everyone to do it together. We leave that up to the leader to decide, how do you want to facilitate it? It can work either way. But that's, if you were going to use it in person, print it out, make sure everyone has a copy, use the roles, use the time recommendations, and really use the constraints to help you.
That's helpful. All right, what about online for the groups that can't gather?
Yeah, so this might be the most common way this tool is used, and though obviously it depends entirely on context and circumstance. The workshop can be run in your standard online video conferencing platforms such as Zoom, Whereby, Skype, and so on. And it's normally the best way to do it in our experience is that the host of the workshop shares their screen with the other participants, and then as they go along fills out the various conversation that's happening and populates the screen. Everyone can see it, everyone can interact with it in that way. And we recommend that when you do that, you also enable, using gallery view and Zoom, for example, see the other participants on the call as well. We know that human interaction and just ability to see each other's faces, really helps in this kind of conversation. Just as a note, whoever shares their screen will by default be the scribe. And so be careful not to overload, too many roles onto one person. And as we all know, meeting online and Zoom or something like that is just not the same as in person. Our recommendation is to have meetings that are a little bit shorter. We definitely recommend splitting up the workshop into 2 parts, and just being aware that people can get tired more quickly. Something that could be very useful if you do this online is to make use of the Google form options that is there on the download. And this is where basically all the questions in the What Now tool that relate to an individual, this can be populated on the Google form. So the individuals before the workshop can go through and answer these questions. The host of the workshop can then take these through the Google form and then populate them onto the document. So you can start your workshop with a lot of the work already done. So that could be really useful. We know people that have done that. Again, just to say at the very end, if you're not familiar with the particular video conferencing platform you're using, our advice is to find somebody who is. I don't know about you, but I've had some awkward moments trying to figure out how to work stuff live in the midst of trying to facilitate groups. So finding someone that knows their way around can be really beneficial.
So that's Shannon, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Mark Elston's put the link to the Google form in the chat if you haven't discovered that yet, and it will give you the ability to copy it into your own Google platform. So
that's so helpful. Online is what we did because we could not gather in person. Just for frame of reference, there were 5 of us. We all serve on the same team within a larger organization. And one of us was the scribe and shared the screen. We also rotated the other roles because it was helpful for us. Some of that was just by team members, some of that was Zoom fatigue. So we rotated the facilitator and the timekeeper so that everybody could participate in multiple pieces across the way. It was helpful for us. It was one of the ways that it was easier for us to stay engaged. All right, so if you can't meet in person and you don't have access to technology for every member of the group, Mark, what do you suggest by doing it by phone?
Yeah, so as Shannon said, we did try to think about various ways this might work and in different contexts. And some congregations, you don't have all of your leadership team on the computer or on Zoom or comfortable with that, and that's okay. Obviously, the further from in-person interaction or video you get, the little bit more difficult it can be, but it still can work. One thing to note right away, people can call into a Zoom call by phone. So if it's a mixed environment where you have some people on Zoom, others could call in and just basically be sort of on speakerphone or into the meeting via the phone. And then you can have kind of a hybrid. We would encourage, if people are going to do it by phone, to send again in advance the full packet, either print it and mail it or send it by email, and encourage those to print it. Definitely split it up into sessions. Doing it all in one session on the phone would be quite long. 2 sessions, maybe even 3. If it's 2, we suggest splitting it at the activities, page 19, and then picking back up with the resources on page 20. But obviously, do it however you want. I mean, we've tried to design it so that you can just follow it as is, but we think leaders are very capable of taking what we put here and adapting it, using parts of it however you want. We recommend appointing a scribe to take notes on a master sheet, especially if over the phone, so that you have one place where it's all being collected. And if it's split into 2 or 3 sessions, you may want to even copy the sheets as far as you got, so say the first half of it, and then mail those or email those back out again to everyone prior to the second session. So that if you're doing it verbally over the phone, those people who are visual learners and visual thinkers can also see it in front of them. And then finally, we'd encourage, find ways to get feedback from everyone in the group, which is more difficult when you're on the phone or on Zoom, but certainly on the phone, which might require, check-ins. Hey, who hasn't had a chance to speak? Have we heard from everyone? Those sorts of things, just to be sure that it doesn't end up being 30% of the group driving the whole process, but that all the voices get heard.